Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the Ted Maravillas America First Hour. Joining us later on in the program will be Dr. Don Boys. He was on the show before, and he'll be talking about evolution, AIDS, controversial issues, former columnist with the USA Today, along with a prolific author. He'll be very interesting. I encourage you to stay tuned to that portion of the show. Also, please try to tape the show if you can. It's good to have this on your tape so you can play it again and again. I do personally think it's going to be very informative. What I'm going to do is just give you a short monologue on different issues of the day. It's just going to be an assortment of issues I think you should know about that you won't necessarily hear on the radio or on the newspapers, TVs, etc. We'll also be going to that political chart I showed you a few programs ago that discuss political ideologies, the political spectrum, and I think that is really something they should use to find out where you stand and to also apply that to the issue so you can at least make a little bit more, a cogent a defense of where you stand on the issues and, of course, where other people stand. And also, I think it might make you a little bit more fluent in discussing the issues with other people. Let me just go through some of the news clippings I saw. I thought, I know this is horrible and it should be pasted up or whatever, but right here you have Attorney General Harshbarger was at a conference giving us his thoughts on crime and violent prevention at Gordon College, ostensibly the Christian college in Wenham. You have here him saying the cause of crime. I quote him. The escalation of urban violence in America stems from a breakdown in values. Oh, is this the same Attorney General that supports abortion on demand and, radical homosexual rights? I mean, come on, really. The lack of values cited as violence. I mean, he's a full-fledged, fully credentialed liberal who is really whacked on all the issues concerning values, and here he is telling us that we need values. I mean, I don't know, I just see the inconsistency, really. Incidentally, there's a great American running for Attorney General. His name is Guy Carbone. He stands for the values that will effectuate a better society because people will be more civil. Not this person just talking about it. We have here, the big thing in the news was the U.S. Congress's vote to ban guns. That was a couple of weeks ago, depending on when you hear this or see this. It was May 6th or May 5th, I believe. And of course, we saw that Congressman Peter Torkelson has been lambasted by the press because it was what a horrible thing to be in opposition to the banning of guns. Well, congratulations, Congressman Torkelson. You finally have upheld the Constitution, and I am proud of you. Nevertheless, of course, you said that you would have banned guns, but you just didn't want to ban those guns or something like that. Really, he's trying to take both sides of the issue and to appease Second Amendment nuts like me. But nevertheless, he did do the right thing. And when they ban guns that look bad, they're going to, it's ridiculous. They're just going to come after all the other guns. There's no difference between a 9mm handgun and a 9mm Uzi that looks like some sort of assault weapon that is only meant for weapons of destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, a car driven the wrong way is an instrument of destruction. I mean, it's all about how you use it. You've heard the old cliche, guns don't kill people, but people kill people. Well, that's true. There is no major difference between a street sweeper, that is it's a shotgun that has a lot of shotgun shells to it, and a regular shotgun. There's no difference, really, other than just carrying capacity. To say that, well, that's not a legitimate hunting weapon. Well, the last time I read the Second Amendment to the Constitution, it didn't say that the Second Amendment was given to us so we can go hunting. No way. No, that is not true. The Second Amendment is there to protect our rights from tyranny, be they foreign or domestic. It's to protect your own family. And you give up those rights now, just the way it happened in Germany back in 1929. They started licensing handguns, all right? Surely that can't be bad. Licensing and registration and all this stuff. Well, in 1938, Hitler passed the Weapons Confiscation Act, and the only people who had guns were people from the fascists, the Gestapo. America's ATF comes to mind. It's the same thing. In order to have a police state, you have to take the arms away from the citizens, because most citizens don't necessarily like living in an Orwellian Big Brother government. Well, I contend that that is exactly what they're trying to do, and that crime is just an excuse that they're using to deprive you of your constitutional liberties. Incidentally, they're using crime and drugs not only to deprive you of your Second Amendment rights, but also search and seizure. They can seize your home, your car. I mean, I heard the other day, if you have over $10,000, they can arrest you. Just blanket arrest you, and they don't have to prove anything. They just take it and say, thank you very much and have a nice day. That is all the telltale signs of a police state. And so whenever you hear someone saying, how can someone be against the banning assault weapons? Well, because maybe those people know the history, and maybe you don't. Maybe the liberal media, Nelson Benton from the Salem Evening News comes to mind. Maybe they're not telling you the full story. Or maybe they know that the banning of guns will endanger your freedom, but they don't love freedom enough to tell you or to stand up for it. Well, I do. This is the Ted Marvelius America First show. America First means we stand up for American principles embodied in the Constitution. That's the Second Amendment. If you say that we don't have a right to carry so-called assault weapons, back in the 1776 or 1787 when the Constitution was passed, the musket was the assault weapon of the day. What is the difference? There's no difference. I mean, who is to say that a .22 is not an assault weapon, but an automatic, semi-automatic .22 rifle is? There's no difference other than it's just scare tactics by that fascist Brady, I forget his first name, and Handgun Control Incorporated. That's fascism, pure elementary fascism. And you need to know about that, and I'm going to be discussing that later on. A quote from Howard Phillips. Apparently, oh yeah, the new crime bill, he basically says that it has, besides the banning of assault weapons, so-called assault weapons, you have increased penalties for so-called hate crimes. What's a hate crime? It's being conservative. You ought to know that. Whenever they talk about racism, bigotry, intolerance, all that stuff, it's usually directed against those who happen to have conservative viewpoints on the issues. You need to know that because it's happening all across America. I don't mean to jump around here, but just to let you know, in Beverly, they're going to make the students go to school on Good Friday. And this letter from the letter to the editor from a brave person from Beverly said, hey, this is an insult to Christians. It is, but that's anti-Christian bigotry in the public school that's happening right now. You should know about it. Little thing on the Whitewater incident, it is basically a fact that they're suppressing the autopsy reports and that he didn't have the gun in his hand. It was placed in his hand. It was obviously not suicide. It's obviously murder. And folks, I mean, you were being led by basically a bunch of murderers. I mean, it is really... I knew that as soon as it happened that it was a hit, but I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that. It just, you have to dig through the issues, and hopefully there'll be a congressional investigation. You have to know the independent prosecutor ain't independent. He's a Clinton operative, and the financial ties have already been established, okay? Now, the special prosecutor is a Clintonite, so it's all a cover-up unless we get congressional investigations. A little funny article or a picture I saw in the newspaper, Salem Evening News, May 9th. It's entitled, First Graders at Thorpe School had guest musician Johnny Kaye come to their Ecology Day celebration. And they're all sitting there like, you know, like, yes, master, what shall we do next? I mean, it's just kind of funny, their pose. They just look so impressionable right here. And on this guy's guitar, you know, singing at Ecology Day, you know, global family. I mean, this guy is a peacenik. I mean, he's a liberal. A liberal. He's just basically a liberal in ecology. He worships the creation rather than the creator. And that bugs me. An education reform bill, which basically is a tax hike to provide for more of this filth. Man, this is bad stuff. You know, this is not just simple teaching of the environment. It's politicizing your child's life. It's all part of OBE. It's horrendous. Ecology Day, that's very reminiscent of, you know, ask your parents if they ever had Ecology Day in their classes. No, they learned about math and writing and all that. They didn't have Ecology Day and worship Mother Earth. That's bad stuff, folks. And you see, the 60s people are now teaching our kids, and it's bad news. New American, here's a quote from Janet Reno. Well, here's a quote about Janet Reno. Attorney General Janet Reno has also made a plea for us to focus on the critical ages of 0 to 3, basically in, I think it's crime prevention and education. Education, that is. She echoes the words of child development specialists in pointing out that this is the period when a child first learns the concept of reward and punishment. Now, the article is entitled Federal Government in the Schoolhouse, written by William Jasper. He's a good man. He wrote a book on the UN. Well, William Jasper, commenting on Janet Reno's so-called concern for children ages 1 to 3, says this: "Now there is an unimpeachable source on parenting and child well-being," speaking of Janet Reno. "Perhaps Miss Reno's FBI ATF strike force was demonstrating the sensitive federal government concept of reward and punishment embodied in Goals 2000 when their operation incinerated," they say 80, it's 90 people, including many children of the critical ages of 0 to 3. In other words, Janet Reno knowingly burned to death children ages 0 to 3 because they happen to be in a politically incorrect household, church. And here she is talking about the well-being of children. She's a mass murderer, okay? And we're still trying to get that information out to you. Linda Thompson's Waco show tape, which shows firsthand what happened there. They used gas, CS gas, which was banned. In other words, the United States Armed Forces could not use CS gas against the Iraqi infidels. They couldn't use it because it was inhumane. Think about it. Just think about that. Think about it. Okay, I think we're going to get to our political spectrum. How much time we have there, producer? 4 minutes? Well, let's go to that then. Incidentally, again, let me say, you'll hear this in the show again, but OBE was just defeated in the state of Virginia. The forces of the people who want to deliberately dumb us down, as Phyllis Schlafly has been stating all across America, are beginning to be exposed for what they are. Folks, in an OBE situation, the smart kids have to wait for the slower kids to catch up, and of course, they sit around doing nothing. They're not going to learn anything. It's bad news, and that's the academic problem, you know, aside from the political stuff. Over here, Maestro, we have a political spectrum chart, which is a much greater improvement of my initial chart. It's actually legible. Hopefully you'll be able to read some of it on the television screen. I know it's not as big as it should be. We'll try to blow it up for you. I don't know how successful we'll be, but essentially when you keep in mind, see, this is not taught in the schools. What we're taught in schools is that it's a circular thing. You know, conservatives are almost the same as like communists or something like that. Like left meets right, but it doesn't. It's a line. It's much more accurate to do it this way. You have on one side total government, okay? It's a concept you can probably understand. And no government. These are understandable concepts. No government and total government. We know that no government is called what? Anarchy, okay? What a lot of people don't realize is total government is more than just a dictatorship. It can be communism, it can be Nazism, fascism, Marxism, which we don't have up here, and socialism, okay? Socialism being the most popular form of totalitarian government. Now, in the middle, what we have here, we see democracy. Democracy. Democracy is one step away from these communism, Nazism, fascism, socialism, what have you. Now, that's an interesting concept, and that is definitely what the Founding Fathers knew and preached about in the Federalist Papers et al. And I will be talking about that in a second. Now, right over here, right next to limited government, we have what is called a republic. That is what the Founding Fathers gave us. Benjamin Franklin was asked, hey, what did you guys give us during the Constitutional Convention? And he was speaking to a lady. He said, Madam, a republic if you can keep it. Well, folks, we kept it for a long time, but I can tell you right now, it's a fact. We're right here. We're talking about the joys of democracy, and we're slipping into liberalism, socialism, and an ungodly mix of basically fascism. Basically, America has taken on the form of socialism, but it has mixed it with capitalism to appease, the average American, and has basically become a form of fascism, which is basically defined as governmental control over industries, primarily through regulation. And of course, it also strips them of the means of production by taxation. And then that is also a very socialist technique. But those are characteristics of a totalitarian government, or a government that is moving away from a limited government. A limited government is what it is, a limited government. It's a republic. And a republic is basically defined as a government of law under a constitution. We have a constitution. This constitution holds the government in check and prevents the majority acting through the government from violating the rights of the individual or the minority. Under the system of government, a lynch mob is illegal. The suspected criminal cannot be denied his right to a fair trial, even if a majority of the citizenry demands otherwise. So he will either be governed by laws or ruled by men. But because of man's nature, and this is very important, we believe that if just left to men just to decide and make up their own laws, will always end up in tyranny. And that's, of course, what we've already done. Here in America, we're ending up in a tyranny because we're really getting away from the Constitution, which gave us this, and we're going right towards here. Hence the gun control advocates. That's why they're doing it. That's why spending is, and the debt is as big as ever. That's why Congress is completely annihilating states' rights. That's why we have an SESD problem here in the North Shore. A federal judge ordering us to pay billions of dollars, or how many millions of dollars, so as to appease their notions of environmental correctness. That is pure elementary fascism. Okay, folks? Hate to say it, but that's just the way it is. You know, George Washington once said this: government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Okay? Government is something to be really feared. That's why we need to limit it. But it is necessary. Anarchy is just as bad as totalitarianism. Okay? And limited government is the perfect solution. But you have to be responsible to keep the limited government. All right? You got to do it. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to close by saying that I hope you will take this into consideration next time you're told that, you know, conservatives are, you know, one step close to being a Nazi. That's not true. The liberals are much more closer to being Nazis and fascists than we conservatives, but you need to know that. And coming up next is Jim Morose's monologue. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, I'm Jim Morose with today's commentary. I'd like to talk about, seeing as it is an election year, just some information to hope to duly inform the voters out there. Today, I don't know how we're voting, if we dedicate our vote towards specific issues, or towards parties, or towards principles. But just the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I know right here in Danvers there are approximately 4,000 registered Democrats, about 3,000 registered Republicans, and about 9,000 registered independents. And it seems to me that there seems to be a drift away from the traditional parties. And what I'd like to do is kind of focus on the two parties that have been the primary focus of our voting electorate. So if we could just switch to the chart, the two parties that we have are the Democratic and the Republican Party. Basically, if you look at the, you know, their principles, the Democratic Party, I kind of label it here, create a crisis, but actually they don't create it. They just take very emotional issues and force them as political platforms, and they push these issues, these emotional issues, and their solution is typically government solutions, which would have to eventually be paid by our tax dollars. So they increase taxes. Basically, their goals are to increase taxes and increase government, but they focus on the issues. But that's basically what the Democratic Party works on. The Republican Party is kind of the opposite. We focus on limited government and limited taxes, and we try to stress the personal liberty and responsibility so that we're all free to exercise how we should run our lives, not how the government should come in. And basically we try to do that with the capitalistic system by increasing the economy and focusing on the American way, which is when you turn 18, you're a legal adult, and you should be able to, you know, you're responsible for your own happiness, sadness, wealth and poorness and whatever. Just stress the American way. Second of all, when we take these the political parties, we kind of get somewhat distorted by the media. I'd like to go to the chart again. The media would take the conservative points and the liberal points. They have what they call now, it used to be slanted news, biased news. Now they have media spin control. So if we take a liberal spin, what they do is they take the positive and increase, any good thing that happens that's the Democratic or liberal, they would increase it to a miracle. And of course, if anything bad happens under the liberal banner, they basically hide it until they're pressured to release it. Of course, the conservative spin is just basically the opposite. Take any negative and blow it out of proportion to make sure that it doesn't look good. And then if anything good happens, they'll, again, just try to hide it until they're pressured to release it. So they're basically doing the opposite. So as informed voters, we just need to be aware of the political parties and the media's treatment of the political parties. And in conclusion, I'd just like to quote a few verses here from the Bible. The first one would be Proverbs 29:16. When the wicked are in authority, transgressions increase, but the righteous will look upon their downfall. We have to remember that our new gun control laws are almost verbatim Nazi Germany. And if we don't know the detail of history, we are destined to repeat it. Another quote from Proverbs would be chapter 21, verse 15. When justice is done, it is joy to the righteous, but dismay to evildoers. Who are the people that are trying to give the criminals the benefit of the doubt over the American citizens? Who is creating this havoc? Justice must be clear, swift, and sure. May God have mercy on us all. God bless you, and good night. Thank you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ted Marvelius America First Show. With us again is Dr. Don Boyce, a former USA Today columnist and a former state representative from Indiana. Among other accomplishments, he's been on Crossfire and very varied talk shows such as the Phil Donahue Show, Sally Jesse Raphael, and Jerry Springer, and has again been a prolific author on issues such as AIDS. I guess a new book coming out on evolution, and in various books such as that. He's also a traveling evangelist, and he will actually be
Hope and 2 stamps. I'll be glad to send. That way we can see where your listeners are coming from.
To get that information again, hopefully we'll either get that on the screen or why don't you give me a call at home, my house. It's 777-9340. If you just want to leave a message, if I'm not there, that's fine. Don't be afraid to call. Just ask for me, Ted, or hopefully we'll get that address on the screen. We have a few more minutes left. I would like to ask you about basically the liberal media, and I'd like to, talk a little bit about that, just to inform people how bad it is out there. But before I do, why are you here in this area this weekend?
Well, I'm speaking. My wife and I are speaking at Tabernacle Baptist Church in cooperation with about three other churches in the general area, doing seminars on husband-wife relationship. And of course, we know the homes are in trouble, and we deal with sex and menopause and PMS and respect and obedience and every aspect of marriage, and 1-hour meetings, and then have a Q&A session, and simply speaking at the church and trying to enhance marriage. Everybody, whether they've been married for 2 years or 25 years, can be kinder and more thoughtful and less selfish. And so we're dealing with those issues.
And don't you think those principles can best be found in the Bible?
They sure can. That's exactly right.
Well, speaking of the Bible, what is the central message of the Bible, and can this affect families?
Well, there's no doubt. And it would not be very great and very smart for somebody to have a good marriage, use some Bible principles to have a good marriage, and still die and go to hell. That wouldn't be very bright.
No.
And so I tell people that, look, sure you want a good marriage, and these Bible principles do work. They absolutely do work in the home. But a person needs to trust Christ as his personal Savior. And it won't make him perfect then, but then he'll have the power to live the Christian life. He can live according to Bible principles. He has the Holy Spirit of God in him to direct his life and to convict him of sin, and help him to be a better husband, or to help her to be a better wife. And so that's the message, basic message of the Word of God. It's in changing lives through the gospel of Christ, and then teaching Bible principles to children and others.
Well, because this is an uncensored production, not censored by the liberal media nor the liberal school system, innocently I encourage you school children, high school students, anybody that hears this or sees this, listen to this, because this is basically illegal in the American classroom, public educational classroom, but it is legal in communist Soviet Union,
exactly
or
right.
the former Soviet Union. It is what Dr. Boys is about to tell you is illegal in the American classroom. Illegal. But it's legal in Russia. Keep that in mind. What's the gospel?
Well, the gospel is that Jesus Christ came, he lived a life, he was then crucified, he was buried, and he physically came up from the grave and ascended into heaven. And Paul the Apostle tells us in 1 Corinthians that that's the gospel, how that Christ died, was buried, and rose again. And then whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord, whosoever will exercise faith in Jesus Christ in repentance of sin, will become a new creature in Christ. It's called the new birth. You literally become a new person in Christ. Not a perfect person. We Christians aren't perfect at all. And sometimes unsafe people misunderstand that. We can lose our temper and we can say things we ought not say, but then we have an opportunity to go to the Lord and confess it and ask God to forgive us and help us not do that same thing again. But the Christian life, I became a Christian at 17, and it's the most incredible experience in one's life. Totally changed my life. I was as mean as a striped snake. I didn't even go to church. Nobody in my family went to church, and I became a Christian, and it totally changed my life. And I wouldn't change it for anything in this world. And as the years pass, it gets better and better and better as the years go by. And we try to live, we Christians try to live according to the principles of the Bible. And the Bible is filled with numerous principles about kindness, fairness, decency, obedience, respect for authority, hard work ethic. All of these are biblical principles that we try to implement in our own lives and rear our children. That's what we're doing here these few days, is trying to help mom and dad to be more happy as mom and dad and be better parents.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. Sorry, teachers, we had to do that. Our founding fathers operated almost completely off of that principle that this government ought to be based on Christian principles.
That's right.
John Winthrop, I had a quote from him. I was walking in Boston the other day. He said something about, we shall be a city on a hill.
On a hill.
And we'll quote it the next time. But then he said, and all the eyes of the world will be watching us. But if we shall deal falsely with our God, we shall become a byword throughout all civilization. In other words, we'll be the laughingstock of the world if we deal falsely with our God. And I'll tell you something, I think, as I'm sure you know, I mean, to the proportion where our institutions and our churches have neglected the Word of God,
yes.
Period. That's the extent that our society has crumbled. And those who look to the government for the answers are just
yes.
looking in the wrong place, are they not?
They sure are.
And unfortunately, that's not getting out in the media. And can you explain to us, again, just maybe some specifics? What do you think is the unfortunate effect that the media is having, not only on the secular world, but also on Christians in general? I mean, what's happening?
Well, as I said, first of all, too many people, Christians and non-Christians, are trusting the media to get their news, information, and not doing any digging and reading and studying for themselves. It's obvious. You see, I resigned from USA Today. I told USA Today not to send me a contract this last year. I said I'm not interested anymore. Can you name me one conservative or one Christian writing for USA Today? Well, you can't. And are there any active supporting Christians in some of the major TV? Who knows? So they're not very outspoken.
Mm-hmm.
the experience I've had, I've been treated fairly well by the media, but they always load up. If I do a show on homosexuality, there'll be 4 or 5 homosexuals and me. It happens all the time. They've never told me never to quote Bible verses, but Cal Thomas was told that by Nightline, not to quote Bible verses. And isn't it interesting that you can say anything you want on TV, you can curse, you can show the human body, and show them doing unbelievable things, but if you quote a Bible verse, that's forbidden. That's strange. We're living in a wild, wild, crazy world where anything goes on TV, but if you want to quote something that's been proved down through the centuries, you're told not to do it.
Again, I had to appeal to you teenagers out there. You're not going to find this information out in the public school system, just period, in the discussion. You need to get some alternative views such as this program. You need to read yourself the Bible. You need to read the Founding Fathers to understand what we're talking about, because you're just not going to find it in a school textbook these days.
That's right.
It used to be, but
Yes,
not anymore.
that's
It used to be. We have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything specifically that you have interest that you'd like to bring up?
Well, you were just mentioning the about in the school textbooks.
Yeah.
I've got a major feature article coming out in USA Today magazine, I believe it's in July, on this very issue. They had an issue where they really attacked Christian education.
I mean, that globalist newspaper?
No, it's the magazine, USA Today magazine.
Okay.
It's a slick, they call it a high-tone magazine out of New York. And but they attack Christian education. They attack publishers of Christian material. Well, I've been involved in publishing of Christian materials, and the information was loaded with errors. The article was loaded with errors, and they talked about some Christian periodicals being sloppy writing and editing and all. And I had a great time writing this. It was unbelievable. I pointed out that in some of the textbooks, and I could go on for hours like this, they had. In one public school textbook, they talked about the English fighting the British during the Revolutionary War. They talked about black slaves chopping sugar cane in the Southwest. There's no sugar cane in the Southwest. They had a picture of an illustration in the public school text of a colonial mother, and it had an electric range, an electric stove there. I think that would qualify as sloppy editing and writing.
Well, along those lines, we only have 1 minute left. You do have a homeschool curriculum?
Yes.
Okay. Why should all parents that can homeschool? Why should they?
Well, of course, you take control of your children is what you do. And I didn't even know, I don't know how you knew that I had a homeschool curriculum, but we have a total curriculum, and we do the records and everything. In fact, if they want to write me at that address I gave, self-addressed envelope, and ask for it.
I heard you did, yeah.
Yes. I would be glad to send them some propaganda on that. But I think parents ought to take control. You see, the state does not own the children. Some states affirm that.
Yep.
The state does not. My children are mine. It's my responsibility, and I'll give an account to God one of these days as to how I rear my children. We get one chance at educating our children. We better do it right the first time. And, of course, there are Christian schools out there, and many of them are good, and maybe most of them. But in homeschooling, you have total control, and you can make sure that your children are getting what they ought to get. And it takes dedicated people, but many people are dedicated and committed to their children, and so they get involved in homeschool.
I hate to cut you off right now, because I think that's a topic that needs to be pursued. The public education system is feeling so bad that steps need to be taken, and especially with this OBE fiasco. Incidentally, OBE got kicked out of the state of Virginia, for you folks who are advocating it. Got kicked out of the state of Virginia, the governor did, under pressure from family activists, and oh well, victory is sweet, at least in that case.
That's
But
right.
thank you, Dr.
Privileged to be with you
and,
again.
thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to being with you again. Have a nice night.